I don't do this like super formal.
Sure.
Um, all right, so we're live. So hey everybody, welcome to Friday Career Lunch Break. I am here with Bradley Stair. I feel like I always call you Brad. Is Brad okay?
Brad's fine. Yeah.
Bradley. I don't want to mess it up.
Yeah.
All right, Brad/Bradley is here because we met through LinkedIn, and I'm always
Mhm.
touting how much I love LinkedIn because you meet people who you would never otherwise meet in your day-to-day life.
Mhm.
And I think we're a perfect example of that. So we met because you are the host of the Job Seeker's Journey podcast. And you
Mhm.
asked me to come be a guest on your podcast. And it was so kind. And we had such a good conversation. And we were just catching up and chatting. And I said, hey, why don't you come on Friday Career Lunch Break and let's just hang out and talk for a little bit. So
Yeah.
um, why don't we start with just an intro, like a little bit about you and
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. So my name's Brad. I live in Oklahoma City. Just just small middle of nowhere city here in Oklahoma City, and we I unfortunately in September of 2024 lost my job suddenly. I was in a job that I loved. I loved the culture. I loved the people. I loved what I was doing. I thought I had found that company that I was going to finally be
Mhm.
at for like 20 years and that I was going to be able to thrive in. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, got let go for whatever reason. Didn't really get an explanation. It's not really the point, but it suddenly I was back on the job market, and either fortunately or unfortunately, I've now been in this situation 3 times in the last 10 years. So it's not foreign to me, but I spent the first probably 15 years mostly as a project manager
Mhm.
in all kinds of industries, working in manufacturing, oil and gas. Later in my career, I started working in IT and consulting, working with the city of Chicago a lot on their initiatives for the citizens and things like that. And then I was just thrown into this job search, and that got me down this path and having to restart all those activities that you have to do to find your next opportunity. And then through the course of that, I, as I was looking on LinkedIn, because all of a sudden your algorithm will change and what you see is other people that are looking for jobs, recruiters sending out things, and all of that.
Mhm.
I thought, man, there could be a podcast here because I was seeing a lot of people that were struggling. Um, I saw people that were 12 months in, 14 months in. I saw the most
Mhm.
heartbreaking ones are the ones who are like 27 months into a job search and they're having just crazy amounts of trouble getting in the door. And if they do get in the door, not getting through. And so I thought, man, there's a lot of things that maybe people just don't know that they don't know. And because I'm going through it too, I'm in the trenches with them. So I was able to kind of bring that perspective as well. And then I just started obsessing over what might be happening and
Yeah.
what people might be going through. And then I got to meet great people like yourself that I would just find people. Either I'd see a post that someone would make and I'd be like, that's really cool. And I haven't seen that before. And I'd reach out to them. Or, um, or I would ask for recommendations and people would make recommendations of people for me to talk to. And then now we're, I don't know, I guess 4 or 5 months into it. And
Yeah.
here we are.
Yeah. I loved it, and we were talking a little bit before we got started here, and
Hmm.
one of the things I said is this theme of doing something that you don't know how to do or that you've never done
Hmm.
before. And I think I want to start there talking with you because you started a podcast, and I don't know
Hmm.
the number of people who I've talked to who will say, "Oh, someday I want to start a podcast, or someday I want to write a book, or someday I want to, start an organization that gives back to this cause or something like that." And then a lot of times that someday phrase, it's sort of like it's fun to talk about, but we also put it on the shelf like I'm not really going to do it. And the biggest reason I hear from people is, well, I don't know how.
Mhm.
And so I always admire when somebody takes a leap towards something they're curious about, they're interested in, they see as maybe purposeful. And it
Mhm.
sounds like that's what you did. So how did you figure that out? Like it's something that you hadn't done before. You worked in project management. Now all of a sudden you're running a podcast and you're finding guests for a podcast. I imagine there might be some imposter syndrome that comes up in that. So I would
Sure.
love to just talk about like how did you kind of get the guts to go do this and start figuring it out?
Yeah. Well, the only thing that's a little different than what you said is that I had done a podcast before. I had done one with some friends of mine. It was completely different than this. It
Okay.
was 3 friends from Claremore, Oklahoma, which is up near Tulsa, and we were
Okay.
just talking about our life and how we grew up. So completely different than this. And we so I had done it, but I hadn't done it with a purpose like this. I had
Mm,
I had done it in a form where it was just us talking about different issues that we were going through, whether it be religious or politics or whatever.
mhm.
But I think to answer your question, I think the thing that will hold the most people back is that I think you think that it has to be perfect at the very beginning, that you have to have the perfect background or that you have to have the perfect equipment or the right format or the whatever. And so then the someday phrase starts popping in your head where you start to go, well, when I get this, or when I have enough money to buy this, or whatever the case may be, you start disqualifying yourself before you ever even get started. But if you look at a lot of the most successful things out there, like if you take podcasts, the Joe Rogan podcast is for the
Right,
longest
right.
time, I think he just got taken over by Mel Robbins as the number 1 podcast, but for the longest time he was, and even
Mhm.
he talks about it was just him sitting in his basement talking to some friends, and they were just putting it out for fun. And
Yeah,
it wasn't the format you see now with a big studio and multi-angle cameras and all these things. It was just them talking. And
yeah,
so it's kind of the same thing in that, and is that you psych yourself out of thinking, I'm not qualified to talk about this. And quite frankly, I'm not qualified to talk about a lot of the stuff that I talk about. What I bring to the table is my own personal experience in my own journey. But I find people like yourself who does work in this space, who knows what you're talking about. And I just give an opportunity for people who are willing to help others to share their expertise, and then we just have a
yeah,
conversation about it, and hopefully it brings information that's useful and that, they find it, hopefully it's entertaining too, but I want them to feel like I walked out of here maybe hopefully learning something about something I can try or something like that. So I guess I don't really have some of the imposter syndrome when it comes to that, because once it's out, and there's nothing you can do about that. So it's
yeah.
kinda like
I like that.
someone's either gonna like it or not,
Yeah,
and most of the time, things are positive, and you just kinda roll with it.
yeah. And I mean, it feels kind of silly to say, but it's like you're never going to learn, you're never going to grow, you're never going to get
Mm-mm.
better at something if you don't just go do it. Like there's always a version 1 of something.
Yeah.
And if I wish more people listened to that voice inside of them. And I think as we grow up as adults, you in a lot of ways, there's a lot of things in life that teach us to start to ignore the voice inside ourselves,
Mhm.
whether it's, pressure from family or people around us. Like I was even interesting story. So my daughter, we're having this trouble with this kid in her class and he's being mean to her. And so, we're kind of having like how do you interact with somebody who's picking on you or like saying mean things about the things that you
Mhm.
do. And this morning she wears Crocs and she has those little Crocs charms all over. And there's one that's a basketball jersey. It's an LA Lakers basketball jersey. She found it in a parking lot. Like we're not Lakers fans. We don't know anything about it, but she really likes it. And this morning she's like, will you help me take this off my shoe?
Mhm.
And I go, why? I said, do you like it? And she goes, well, yeah, but such and such kid is gonna, he always comments on it and says, like, it's dumb and I shouldn't have it on my shoe. And so she was trying to pick it off of her shoe. And I was like, no, we're not going to change something you love because someone else doesn't like it.
Mhm.
And, but like all of those little micro moments in our lives build up as adults. Like we still do that. Like taking the croc charm off is the adult, like it translates into I'm not going to make the podcast because someone's going to think it's stupid. Or I'm
Mhm.
not going to, post something because somebody might say that it wasn't great, or I only got 3 views on something, or I'm not going to try for that job because I don't feel like I'm 100%. Um, so I really love that you're, even, you've done a podcast before, but like you're going into a space where, as we were prepping, you kept saying to me, well, I'm not really an expert in this.
Mhm.
And I don't think people need to be experts as much as they need to be curious, and they need to listen to that voice in themselves of like, this is something that I feel drawn toward for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And like loving that for yourself and like saying yes to it.
Yeah. Well, and I can tell you what's really interesting that I saw something right before I started doing this. And it was a guy, I think his name's Myron Golden. He's on YouTube a
Okay.
lot.
Okay.
He's a black man, really, really awesome speaker, and he talks a lot about businesses and things like that. And he was referring to starting a business, but
Mhm.
it totally resonated with me when I started thinking about the podcast, which was what he said is if you obsess about other people's problems, then you're more likely to have success than if you make it all about yourself. And he was referring to like writing a book or doing a podcast.
Yeah.
If I made this podcast only about myself and my talking about my struggles or my journey or my whatever,
Yeah.
quite frankly, and with respect to myself, no one's going to care. Like my parents may listen, but like no one else is probably gonna care, right? But if I
Right.
obsess about what other people are going through and I see the posts that people are making where they're distraught and that they're frustrated about the applicant tracking system, or they're frustrated about
Yeah.
their resume or whatever, now I'm talking about them, and more people wanna hear about their stuff than they wanna hear about me. So that was one thing. And then the other thing that I kind of realized early on is I used to work at a place and I was, I'm from Oklahoma. We have our personality that we have. It's a pretty kind culture. It's a pretty like open doors for people. Yes, ma'am.
Mhm.
Yes, sir. A lot of things like that, which translate really well in personal life, doesn't always translate great in uh professional life, and you have to learn how to be more stern, and you have to learn how to be more forceful and bold and things like that sometimes. But I used to have a boss that used to not like just my personality. I was effective as a project manager. I had successful projects, and they were on time, on budget, all the things that project managers are supposed to look after. But he didn't always like my approach because I'm a very people person. I care about the team, I care about the clients. I really want to get to know them and what makes people tick and what I can do to remove barriers for them and things like that. And he used to call me things like the kumbaya guy, and
Oh.
like he thought I was just so like um so soft, if you will. But as I was thinking about this later on, as much as that hurt to hear at the time, even though I'd still get projects and I got brought into some projects to like take over as things were not going well. And
Mhm.
because I had the ability to connect with a client, and especially if the project was having bad communication, I was good for that because I was able to come in and like get to know people and really find out what the actual issue was by having that conversation. But when it comes to things like a podcast, it translates really well because I have the ability I care a lot, and I care about the audience and things like that. Now, I don't care about everyone knowing me or everyone, I don't need the numbers or the likes or the whatever. So I only care about, who is this resonating with people? So if I ever get a comment that says, "Man, I really enjoyed that conversation with Aaron because of this," which I think, I connected with you and told you that you
Yeah.
were the most listened to one that I had to date, and that's still true. And so I
I'm
like to
so proud
try.
of that, by the way.
Yeah,
Like, you told
you
me
should
that, and I
be.
was like, "Oh my gosh."
Yeah, you should be. But if there's one person
Yeah.
who will
Yeah.
connect with you, that's enough,
Yeah.
for me because I'm like, well, at least that person got something good out of it. And so it's funny how things translate to what used to be told to me as a negative
Mhm.
is actually what helps me do something like this because I am able to connect with the people pretty quickly. I'm not, an arrogant guy that's like thinks that I am going to spread all this amazing good news to everyone, and I just want to help people um get information. So you never know what might be like good for you, you know?
You know, it's that's a really I like that, I was talking to a colleague the other day, and we've worked together for many years, and so at this point, I would say, we're people who we can talk probably a little more candidly at work. We talk a little bit with a little bit less guard around. You can say what you really think to those people,
Mhm.
and I love working with those type of people. But um, this person asked me, like, "Have you always been this way? Has this always
Mm.
been who you were?" Because I'm a doer. Like, if there's something that needs to be done, like, if it's in my list of responsibilities, like, it is done, it is handled, and I am my toughest critic. And to what you were saying about, like, you being the kumbaya guy, like, one person could look at that and kind of look down their nose at that and use that as a point
Sure.
of judgment. On the other hand, it's probably one of your greatest strengths.
Mhm.
And so this person and I were having this discussion about knowing what you're good at, and we got into this whole conversation around how, they say you go through this, like, strengths and weakness exercise, and it's like to know what your weakness. And I think, it's good to know what you're not great at, but also, if you could spend time really leaning into something where you're great, or trying to marginally improve the area where you're not so great.
Mhm.
I think so many of us have this idea that everything has to be great, or everything about us has to be perfect, instead of looking at it and saying, I know where I'm really great, and I know how to put myself in a position where I'm going to shine in those ways.
Mhm.
And maybe that's a maturity thing. Maybe that comes with a little bit of time. And as you sort of figure yourself out, through your 20s into your 30s and all of that. But um, becoming less apologetic about maybe some of the things that one person doesn't love about you, but it
Mhm.
actually is your strength. And when you go and apply those things, is where you do your best, richest, most meaningful work.
Mhm. For sure, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. It's you are who you are, but you are learning and growing, and not everyone comes out of the womb this perfect, I don't know,
I would say
employee
nobody
that's
does. Nobody does, right?
no one does. And one of the things that you notice in this day and age, I think one of the biggest hardships that I think people are having as there is sometimes companies don't want to necessarily hear where you've grown.
Mm,
I know in interviews that I've been in, I've been asked like, what has been the biggest thing that you've learned? And what I'll say, and it's true, is it was leadership. Um, holding people accountable because of the
okay.
way that I was brought up. I believe that if you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. right? That's the way I
Mhm.
was taught as a kid, that's the way people are around where I am, and so if a team member said they were going to do something at a certain time, by a certain date, whatever, I believed them, and I felt like they were definitely gonna do it. Well, what that did is I didn't hold people accountable at first as well as I should have, and I got
Mm,
burned a few times by people saying they were gonna do something and then not doing it for whatever
right.
reason. They may have had a good reason, they may have had, uh, something come up, whatever it may be, or they just may not have done it, and I didn't hold people accountable enough, so I had to learn some of that accountability really early on in my career of how to hold people accountable, but not be the dreaded project manager that when you walk in the door, everyone goes, "Oh god, here he comes." Like he's about to ruin our morning type because
Yeah,
I've known those guys too, right? That are
yeah,
just jerks and they're very effective because you're almost afraid of them. I never wanted to be that person, but I
yeah.
also wanted to be able to get the accountability out of them. But to tell a company that sometimes it seems like, especially nowadays, because everybody wants you to know everything before you walk in the door, to tell them that, hey, I did have to grow in this. And there may be some areas where I still have to grow. There's a lot of companies nowadays that don't like that. And like you can lose them immediately if you do that. And so that's one of the things that I've noticed in
Yeah,
my thing is like you almost have to tactfully not be completely honest, which sounds
yeah.
weird, but like if you're too honest sometimes that doesn't that doesn't get you to the next round sometimes, you know? So,
Which sucks. Like, I mean, I'll just say it, like, done a lot of hiring over the
mhm,
years, like a lot. And I mean for such a spectrum. Like I used to run a grocery store and so I hired hourly
mhm,
employees who turned over quickly and now I hire high level, salespeople with 20 plus years experience at
mhm,
massive corporations. And one of the things that I feel like has served me the best is when you listen to somebody and you really hear who they are as a person. And
mhm,
I do think a lot of organizations and a lot of people who are in a hiring capacity get that really wrong. Like they've
mhm,
made up like to our point about like having to be great at everything versus knowing what you're good at and knowing what you're not good at. I'd rather hire the person who has that self-awareness and who can tell me, here's where I made a mistake, this is what I learned. Here's what I'm not so great at, but this is what I do to, balance that. Like I want to hire that person who has that 360 awareness of themselves. It's unfortunate that in my opinion, there are a lot of maybe antiquated styled companies that are still trying to hire this textbook robo person. None of us is winning when we go into an interview and I go, Brad, what's your greatest weakness? And you're like, trying too hard. And I'm like, yeah, that's it, right? You're hired. Like, I mean, it's total BS. Like we have just exchanged nothings back and forth, and neither of us know, I don't know who you are as a person, as an operator, and you don't know anything about my actual expectations. And I
mhm,
just think, when organizations don't mature to the point where they're asking really rich and inquisitive questions that allow all of us space to be human and to show our growth and our humanity and our perception and stuff like that. Like what a miss. It's almost a flag for me of a company. Like I don't know if I want to work in an organization where if that was their yardstick for me. I mean, I know when you're looking and you need a job, like it feels different, right?
yeah,
Because family and bills and all that. But I mean, if you really get down to it, they kind of are flying a flag to let you know we're not so smart at this, right? Like
yeah.
we're kind of doing it like an old school way still, and we don't know a better way to do this. Um,
Yeah, and that's totally fair, and I'll give you a quick illustration. I think to
yeah.
kind of your point is my at one point, so I lost my job suddenly, but with my wife, she was working at an oil and gas company. They were merging. they'd had a ton of layoffs anyway, and we actually found out 3 months in advance that she was going to lose her job in December. So
Mhm.
we were faced with potentially both being out of a job at the same time for a little while.
Ooh.
And she started applying, obviously, and she applied to a job at another oil and gas company, and through the applicant tracking system, almost immediately got rejected. She had known some people at this company because some of the ones from her old company had went there, and she had
Yeah.
even sent out emails to hiring managers, including the an actual hiring manager that she ended up working for, and didn't receive anything back. And then the only way that she was able to get in the door was a recruiter called an ex-coworker of hers about a
Mhm.
contract position, and that coworker was already working at that company, so they recommended them talking to my wife. My wife ends up going in for an interview for the contract position, and they immediately through the interview said, "Man, why don't you come back in 2 days and talk to us about this permanent position?" And she pretty much got it immediately.
Yeah.
But through the system,
Yeah.
she would have never gotten that. Like, there was no chance. She got turned down immediately by the applicant tracking system, and the
Yeah.
applicant tracking system is a gray ocean of who knows
Yeah.
what it's sometimes all about, but, like, it's just an illustration of, like, they would have missed out on a perfect employee for them, and now she's
Yeah.
thriving there and, like, doing amazing things, and she's a rock star, and I'm not just saying that because 'cause I'm married to her. She's a rock star at what she does, but, like, they would have never gotten her because if they'd went the traditional routes, um,
Yeah.
and so it's funny how that works.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely it's a human process. It's a human process. What I mean by that
Mhm,
is, the applicant tracking system, you can ask knockout questions. So it could say, do you
mhm,
have a college degree? Or do you have 3 years experience doing this? Or do you live in Oklahoma? Or, and if you answer yes or no, it's like, yes, you go past go, no, you're done, right? Because they need those baseline things. So that can happen
mhm,
really quickly. What I tend to find is like when you get those like rejections pretty quickly, more often than not, there is a person reviewing it. But what a lot of people, you know, there's like so many pieces and parts. So it could be that the person who's scanning your resume, a lot of times more junior people are put into that sort of qualification role. Like they're going to go through and they're going to scan through. So they're like an associate who's been hired more recently, and they're going to go through the resumes and sort through the noise and kind of find the ones that are the best fit and give those either to the primary recruiter or pass those to a hiring manager or something like that. So what's scary is a lot of times you have your least qualified person trying to read through something and diagnose whether on paper this person is the right fit. And so you've got a bunch of black and white text. Maybe the person who wrote the resume did a, bad, good, great job of explaining themselves. You've got this person with unknown qualification reading the resume. Like there's so many variables happening right there in that like first handshake of information that it's so easy to just cruise through the applications because there's so many of them and they're not they don't feel human in a
mhm.
sense, right? These are just documents. I'm just reading through documents. I don't know Brad, I don't know Nancy, I don't know Julia. Like I'm just reading it and going, is this person a fit? Is this person a fit? Is this person a fit? And so I think it does bring up the importance of like what are you doing to advocate for yourself. A lot of people will say
Mhm,
network. I think it's more about advocacy, and networking can be one of the strategies, but um, there can be things like I keep talking about using video. Do you place a link to a video at the top of your resume where you can talk to them, if you will, for a second and like have it be a pattern disrupt for somebody.
mhm,
So they click the link, they watch it for 60 seconds, and they meet Brad as opposed to looking at black and white text and trying to figure out who Brad is. Yeah, going through people telling everybody getting referrals, stuff. There's so many ways. And I mean, that really is the way that so many people find jobs. Not everybody. Some people submit their jobs into a portal and they get called and
Mhm.
they go through the process and they get hired. Like that happens too. But I think when you're in the seat where you're actively looking, that advocacy plan is really important for what are all the things you're doing in addition to putting your resume into the pool to try to show up in an otherwise very crowded room.
Yeah. And if, if there's one theme that's come out, so I guess I've had 18 episodes at this point. I've talked
Okay.
to, I think I've had 14 guests at this point. And if there's one theme that seems to has unexpectedly come out of all of these, is that the importance of human connection is still
Mhm.
alive and well when it comes to job searches and finding your next opportunity and things like that. And also the ap- the approach of how you approach those connections
Yeah.
is very, very important because it's so easy for someone who's looking for a job to be pretty self-focused, right? You need a job, you're
Mhm.
needing income, you got to take care of your family, you've got all of these things. When you reach out to somebody, there's a clear like, yes, I'm looking for a job thing, especially if you have an open to work banner, things like that. People see that. And they're probably a little skeptical of that immediately because you are immediately reaching out to them and they're just expecting your next question to be, so do you got an opportunity for me, basically?
Yeah.
But the importance of really doing your homework and almost making the majority of your job in the job search of doing your upfront homework, because everybody talks about tailoring resumes and I don't know if that really does anything. There's with the applicant tracking system is so keyword driven that even if you have experience in that exact thing, if you don't use the exact keyword that they're looking for, you can get rejected, even if you've been doing that same thing for 15 years, right? But having the focus of focusing on making a target list. So, coming up with a list of companies that you want to work for and writing them down. I want
Mhm.
to work for Devon Energy, or I want to work for um, Oracle, or I want to work for Amazon, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And you make your target list, you do your research of what are the issues that they have? What kind of problems do they face in what I do? Like what is something they may be going through now? And how would how would I fill that void? How would I help them solve that problem? And if you can do your homework beforehand, and then your conversation is pointed back to them instead of at you the whole time, where you're only talking about your experience and you're talking about what all you've done and you're talking about all these things. And then eventually you kind of get to, well, what opportunities may you have? If you can
Yeah.
kind of make it about them and what their problem may be and how you feel like you would solve that problem, and you could, and now you're having a value conversation, and they may not have something at that point, but they're going to remember that more than anything else, and they're going to say, oh man, I remember we do have this problem and this is popping up now. And and now you've created a quality relationship that you try to give to them without any expectation. And then the way I believe humans really are is like we want to help each other. Things like this podcast, the thing you
Yeah.
learn is that there's so many more people that are willing to help than you would ever think that there was. You know, part of the issue when you ask me about why people don't do it, you get afraid to ask, would you want to come on? Because you're afraid that they're going to say no. And they might. And I've had
Yeah.
plenty of no's. But there's so many more people who do and are willing to do it. I've only had one person in the whole time I've reached out to people. I've only had one person say, "I need you to give me 250 bucks or I'm not gonna talk." Right? One.
Wow.
The rest have been like, "Yeah, I'm totally
Yeah.
totally willing to help. And then we have discussions like, what do you like to talk about? What do you not want to talk about? All of those things. But if you can switch it and make it more about the human connection, you have a far better chance. You create better professional relationships that way. You can help people out. I mean, an example of that is I had a there's a guy here local who I've known. He was a recruiter. He tried to help me find a job back in 2020 when I was looking, and we stayed in contact. Well, then when this podcast came around, I thought, hey, he would be a good one to talk to. So I talked to him and he came on. But what happens is we just kind of became more friends than anything else. And we talk every once in a while back and forth. And he's starting a company, and he's making apparel and hats and things like that. And me being a bald guy, I wear a lot of hats. And so he asked me what type of hats people like,
Yeah.
and I help him out, and I have 0 expectations for him to do anything for me. Like, I just wanna be his friend, and I just wanna, like, have conversations and learn from him and things like that. But what has started to happen is I expect him to do nothing for me helping to find a job. But he has sent me, like, 3 different potential opportunities that he's heard of, he's in a network of, he's connected me to the right people, all of those things, all out of the goodness of his heart. And if I'd have been hounding him to, hey, who do you know? Who do you know? Who do you know? I probably wouldn't have got that. But
Right.
because like I'm just willing to help him, he's willing to help me. And I think if we can get back into that, um, then I think these processes can be better, and better for mentally for the candidates, better mentally for companies, help companies find the right people,
Yeah.
all those things. I know I've appealed before of like the human side of this whole process. You've got a human as a candidate. And
Yeah.
especially if they get to the second and third round, they want to work for you. Like if you get to the second, third round and they're still wanting to do those interviews, like they've done their homework. They want to work for you. And they're hoping that they're the right fit. And so the
Yeah.
the trends that you see all the time of ghosting and things like that is just it's like dehumanizing those candidates in some ways. Because I know it wouldn't take any time at all, even if it's a generic email to say, "Hey, we just didn't select you." But that's not happening. But on the flip side, to be fair, I also have started to make a appeal to candidates and saying, "Hey, you're dealing with human beings as well. And they're probably busy. And if you're especially if you're in a small to mid-sized company, they may be a one-person show in the HR department, and they may have to
Yep.
deal with multiple openings. They have their other duties on top of that. They're dealing with whatever they've got to deal with, if it's payroll, if it's whatever else. So have a little grace for them too, and don't immediately like dismiss this company because maybe it took them a little bit, or, you know,
Yeah.
just the human
Yes.
process of it."
It's a really good call out to kind of keep the human component of it. And
Mhm.
you know, I look a lot of times at, when I go back to the whole advocacy thing and all of that, and the number of people who, have, we've crossed paths and I've helped them or they've helped me or things like that. And one thing I've noticed is, you hear people say that phrase, help me help you.
Mhm.
And a lot of times it is, it, it makes it easier for somebody to help you if you're really clear in what you need from them. And I had a conversation with someone the other day and they said, "Oh, yeah, I'm talking to all of these people and I'm getting to know them all and I'm spending a lot of time doing this and I'm just not getting any results." And I said, "Well, what have you asked for help in a certain way?
Mhm.
Like have you asked somebody for help?" Because that's the other thing is I think a lot of people are willing to help, but like looking at it from my perspective, like I can't really guess what you need help with. I would need you to tell me what you need help with. And so
Mhm.
a lot of times too, it's not even so much that I feel like I need a long-standing relationship with somebody as much as it's transparency, sincerity, brevity, and just like tell me how I can help you. And I will tell you if I can help you or not.
Mhm.
And but like you made the comment about sometimes things happen, right? Like people are busy and things come up and their kid gets sick and they're the recruiter, but also, they may be dealing with a family member who has terminal illness. I mean, these things are real. And so we all kind of have like disassociated from the humanity of this process that candidates are human. They come with great traits and not so great traits. And that's all of us because we're all humans. And recruiters and hiring managers are humans and they have a whole spectrum of knowledge and experience and their own problems and a whole desk load of work. And maybe the company is a total crap place to work and they are doing their best and they're not supported. And so, it's like there's so many factors that can come in. And I think that word of grace or like offering benefit of the doubt to somebody, just leading with what you need, following up, asking a question. If you have a follow up question, a lot of people ask me, well, like, when's the right time to follow up with somebody? How long should I wait? Or is this okay? These are people,
Mhm.
like keep it short and say, I'm really excited about this and I want to follow up with you. Is there any update? Like, that's great to send to somebody. And it I don't know, it's like so many of us have become afraid to be humans because we're afraid that if we act human, we're gonna look flawed, and if we look flawed, they won't want us.
Mhm. And
And
there is some conditioning in that,
yeah, oh,
like,
sure.
you do I know I've felt like sometimes with some of the positions that I've talked to where even if you meet the criteria, you find out that that company is looking for, like, not only a unicorn, they're looking for a purple unicorn with a rainbow horn that their left foot goes slightly to the left. Like, that's sometimes how detailed I feel like sometimes that these can be, and you can get conditioned to that, but that's, you know and it's really important. The unfortunate thing after 2020 too is that after COVID hit and all those, like, get-togethers that used to happen, young professionals. I know
Mhm.
the PMI organization used to have a local chapter meeting at least once a month, maybe twice, where
Yeah.
you could go and meet other people in the profession, and you can have that conversation over lunch and try to get to know people. A lot of that has kinda gone away, um, in a lot of organizations, and that's unfortunate because that is a great way to meet a lot of people,
Yeah.
and it's real easy to isolate yourself and bring yourself in and those kind of things, um, that makes you not present yourself in the best light whenever you do get in front of somebody. And one of the things with this podcast, one of the first things that popped in my head when I was like, I want to do this, and why do I want to do this, and all of this was, if you don't take care of yourself mentally, physically, all of these things, and you isolate yourself, which is a big tendency, um, that people do. You feel like people are looking weird at you or whatever, which is probably not true, but you have that and you isolate yourself. Well, the moment you do get in front of a company and you do get to have an interview, you may not be presenting your best self to somebody because you're
Yeah.
down, you're you may have a negative feeling going into it of they're not going to like me or whatever. And so part of the thing was to try to say like, "Hey, stay on top of that." Like, really get yourself in a community, do things that make you feel better about yourself. If you need to talk to a counselor or something, talk to them and get those feelings out and start presenting your best self so that when you do get in front of somebody, you're ready and
Yeah.
you are presenting who you are, and then they make their decision from there, and you can kind of live with that better than if you walk out of an interview being like, god, I didn't say this and I really wanted to say this, or why did I do this, or why was I acting this way, or whatever. At least you can say I presented my best self, and then they choose yes or no, and you can live with that. So that was a big thing for me was, can you make sure you stay on top of your own health,
You're
and that,
right.
because you're dealing with
Yeah.
rejection. You've
Yeah.
dealt with rejection from getting let go of a company, right? Some company out there, unless you did something egregious that you earned being fired, most likely it was a
Yeah.
shock. Or,
Yeah.
even if you saw it coming, it's a shock the moment they say, "This is your last day." So you
Yeah.
deal with that. You deal with the reality of, "I've got a family, we've got bills to pay, we've got all these things that we've gotta take care of." So you deal with that. And then you make all these you send all these applications out, and the majority of them most likely hopefully you get a rejection, but a lot of times you hear nothing, which
Right.
is now the new rejection. When you hear nothing,
Right.
that tends to
Right.
be the new rejection. So you deal with rejection the whole time.
Yeah.
So you gotta be able to, like, get yourself in a good frame of mind so that you can present yourself in your best light, you know?
Think about too, you talked about losing a job. I have lost a job
Mhm.
unexpectedly as well. And there's real grief in that.
Mhm.
And, I think we tend to ignore that there's this feeling of rejection and grief. And to your point of, I'm a huge advocate for therapy. Like I go to therapy
Mhm.
every week. I find it to just be such a powerful outlet of like, that's my space to just recenter. And
Mhm.
I think that when you go through something that's a loss, or even if you're leaving something that was like I work with a lot of teachers, and teachers, it's a mission driven role. And so a lot of times there's identity mashed into your job, like who you are and what you do are kind of all the same thing. And so when you've either had something happen to you where you haven't gotten to choose that your time has come to an end, or even if you are choosing, the grief, the loss, sort of the sadness it's real, that can hit
Mhm.
you. And so then if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not, you know, therapy or some sort of community, like you said, networking, getting out amongst people. I think we all got really used to hanging out in our houses still because of all the pandemic time, and getting back to, can I find a local chapter of something to go to? Is there a women's networking group I could go to? Starting to surround yourself with people, it's amazing how that can really help you process through those things. Because when you go into a job interview, like you said, you don't, if you're not showing up as your best version of yourself, as your whole version of yourself, you're going to feel like you left stuff, on the table that you didn't get to say that you wanted to, that you're being self-critical, and you're still kind of carrying the dark stuff from the thing that happened
Mhm.
unresolved, and that rolls over into how you show up and how you feel and how that rejection of a job hits even. I
Mhm.
think about that, like when I lost my job, and I had only worked in the grocery industry. And I mean, I did a lot of stuff, but I didn't know, I never had a resume. I never used Outlook. I wore jeans to work every day. Like I didn't know what the corporate world looked like. And I was just sitting here thinking like, what do I do? Right? Like I know I'm good at stuff, but how do I tell people what I'm good at, or how do I even find the right things? And I hadn't processed losing the job, and here I was trying to rally myself to be this new version of myself that was going to be great in a totally unfamiliar territory, while I was already
Mhm.
like, I kind of failed in the last place I was at. And I feel like crap, and I'm crying every day. And I'm like, but I'm going to go apply for more jobs. And um, it's like, that's some really important stuff to find what works for you, to work through, to get yourself like really centered, whatever that means
Yeah.
for you, so that when you go into those conversations, your backpack doesn't have like weird little stuff hanging out in it that,
Yeah.
is probably causing you some trouble.
Yeah, one of my favorite things that I've heard was, um, learning how to reframe things in your mind and learn how you can take ownership of everything,
Mm,
in some form or fashion. Here's an example.
okay.
So I've already said that I was let go unexpectedly. Loved the job, wanted to be there forever. Suddenly it was gone. And not only was it gone, but I was given little to no explanation of why. Now I live in a right to work state. They don't have to have a reason and all of those things, right? So
Mhm.
it'd be easy for me to sit here on something like this or on every podcast I make or every conversation I have and play the victim and say, "Look what they did to me. Look, like they did this to me. They put me in a horrible spot. I wasn't doing anything. I was having successful projects. I was all of these things and point, and play basically a victim. But on the other side, if I can look at it objectively and try to find areas that I can take some ownership in the situation, not taking on the blame or anything like that, but look at where I could have had ownership. So in that scenario that I just said, here's the way I would reframe it in my mind. I was in a good job doing consulting for city and state governments. I enjoyed it. It was a hard job, but I really enjoyed it. And I got recruited to go to this last company. Now, I made the decision to leave a job that I was doing well at and um and would who knows, I could still be there today to go here because I thought it was a good place and I really enjoyed the culture and I thought that it was going to be a great opportunity for me. When they hired me, I was the only one who hadn't been like 15 to 20 years in the oil field business. I had been in it before, but I was coming back. So I wasn't the guy who had been immersed in it for 20 years. So they took a chance on me. I had skills that were very translatable to what we were doing, but I also was having to spend extra time in my day relearning things about the data management processes of oil and gas companies. It was a stretch when they hired me. And the other thing that I did is that because I was the new guy who was coming into an industry I hadn't been in a while, I I defaulted a lot to higher ups and people who had been there for a long time. I defaulted to their opinion. I got their opinion on everything. I may not have been as bold as I should have been. I may not have like taken on everything that I could have taken on because I was defaulting trying to make sure that I was doing it their way, you know? So if I look at it that way, I can take ownership and find things that I can improve in for the next opportunity. And
Yeah.
I can look at that and I can say, okay, well, in the next job, I'm going to be bold. In the next job, I'm going to know where my mind is and what I know that I know. I'm still going to ask questions, but it'll be a different type of tone when I ask those questions. More bold questions and things like that and less defaulting.
Mm.
So if I'm able to do that, now I'm not looking at that situation as they did this to me. I'm put in this tough spot because of them. Oh, woe is me. Because no one wants to hear that anyway after
Right.
a while, right? Maybe your mom does, but like no one else
Even
does.
your mom gets sick of it, I
Even
think,
your
after
mom
a
gets sick of
while,
it, but she may
right?
listen to it. Like, she may listen to it, but eventually she may be like,
Yeah,
"Okay, you said this 3 or 4 times, like,
like,
that's
time
enough."
to move on, right.
But so now you can start to think, "Well, where do I wanna go?" You can look at things as maybe an opportunity. You have an opportunity to really reevaluate, "Do I wanna continue in what I've been doing? Do my skills translate to something else that I didn't even think that I could do at the time?" You know, is there another thing that maybe I'm willing to take a little less money for because I really love this and not this, and now I can look for this? You know, you can really evaluate it and you have that opportunity if you want to take it. And
Yeah.
it's less about, well, this company didn't want me, this company didn't want me, this company didn't want me. And you can throw yourself down a dark hole if you want to. And listen, I do that. I do all that reframing stuff and I still have peaks and valleys of
Yeah.
where I'm at. You know, I had a
Sure.
rough couple of weeks a couple of weeks ago. Like I was kind of starting to feel it. Things had dried up. You know, that stuff happens, but if you can find ways to reframe it, it just helps, you know?
What in addition to reframing, what helps you, because that sounds like resilience to me,
Mhm.
right? That's what you're really talking to me about in this is, like you said, you have kind of your peaks and your valleys still, and it's not that it doesn't happen. And I think that
No.
that's an important message for people, is that there isn't a version that someone's doing where they're never having valleys.
Right.
Nobody is living through, whether it's a job search or something else in their life, where they're not having peaks and valleys. And my mom always says, when the good times are good, notice it, because you know that there will be bad times too. And like you have to really relish when your times are good.
Mhm.
And so like what helps you be resilient like this? Or what have you done to build your resiliency through this?
Some of it I think is um, just kind of maybe ingrained. Um, you know, my career trajectory didn't start off easy. I've had some tough jobs that I've heard a lot of things
Yeah.
that I probably shouldn't have been told as far as, I've taken phone calls from people chewing me out and saying that I should basically be dead and all those things. Like I've been in a lot of those kind of situations, but it's just I think it's I look past myself a lot. I before we had a kid, I thought of my wife and I
Hmm.
was like, okay, well, I want to be a partner to her, and I don't, me wallowing doesn't doesn't help the situation. Um, it's not going to make me contribute anymore. So, jokingly, my wife will tell me that some of her favorite memories of me have been when I've been in this situation. Because something
Really?
clicks in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first time I got laid
Yeah.
off after an oil downturn in 2015,
Yeah.
I was in a weird spot. I had some experience in a couple things, but I didn't have enough experience. I didn't have the patented 5 years experience that everyone asked for. Right.
Yeah.
And I wasn't very attractive to really any company, but I had just enough experience to get my PMP. And so I spent 6 weeks making it my full time job studying to get a PMP. And then that at least gave me something behind me to where a company would take a chance on a guy who on paper may only have 3 years experience, but he's got this PMP certificate. So he knows how to
Yeah.
run a project, you know? The second time, um, I spent it helping people around my neighborhood to keep my mind off of things. And I just, just went into other things. And then applied as I could but even then I took a job that I really didn't want, but it was the only one being offered. And it's the only time it was a bad fit, right? So I didn't really think about that.
Yeah.
So some of it's innate, but a lot of it is I have good friends around me. I have to force myself sometimes to not be antisocial and still go around people. I think that's an important thing, because your inclination is to want to pull back, and you
Yeah.
have it in your mind that people are thinking less of you, or that, they see you walking in the middle of the day or something and they're like, what's going on with this guy? Is he, um, but that's not really happening. And so if you're able to surround yourself with good people who are willing to talk to you, that's helped. Um, and then it's just keeping your eye on something bigger. Um, which, can be the podcast that I've started doing. That's a
Hmm.
bigger thing that I now, even if I do, or when I get a new opportunity, I'll still do, because I still believe in trying to help. Um, and just thinking of, I have a kid that's going to be going to college, and she's going to get married, and we have financial things that we're
Yeah.
going to have
It's a good
have.
why, isn't it?
And so you think of them, and I'm like, okay, well,
Yeah.
for even if I don't want to do it for myself, for them, like
Yeah.
I'll keep going.
Yeah.
And that's just I
Yeah.
guess how I was taught and things.
So community and finding a why for you.
Finding a why.
Hey,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't believe this. You're not gonna believe this. We've been talking for an hour and we're coming to the end of our time already. It felt
I believe
fast.
it. I'm a talker. I believe it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, this has been great. I always ask when we wrap up, I always ask every
Yeah.
guest for a piece of advice, either a piece of good advice that someone gave you that you really like, or maybe just a piece of advice that you'd like to share with people that you'd like them to take with them at the close of this?
Yeah, so because a lot of the people that I try to reach are job seekers, the biggest thing I
Mhm.
wanna tell them is, A, you're not alone. There are a lot of people going through the same situation that didn't have any control over the company deciding that they wanted to do layoffs or, whatever. So you're not
Yeah,
alone and
yeah,
you're not the only one. And it is okay to reach out to people, friends, family. You're welcome to reach out to me if you see me on LinkedIn. I'll talk to you too, and I'll be an ear and things like that. So you're not alone. That's one. The other one is you're not a failure. And I know it can feel like that,
yeah.
um, especially if you're in a situation where there was a very few people that were let go, and it was you that was one of them. And now you're seeing that you don't have any income coming in. You're not a failure, and that's just important for people to know. And then you will find something else. It only takes one. There's however many millions of companies, hundreds of thousands of companies, however many companies there are, but you only need one
Mhm.
to say yes. And they're out there, and you will find them. And not only will you find them, but you'll thrive because you've gone through this experience.
Yeah,
And you're better for having gone through this, whether it feels like that or not. And you probably don't see it right now, but you will do better and you will thrive in your next position. So
yeah,
I think that's the biggest thing is, hey, you're not alone. And there's a
yeah,
lot of people out there that um, are here for you. Reach out. Don't just
yeah,
don't just try to take it on yourself.
yeah, yeah. Find your community, like you said,
Hmm.
find your people and connect
Hmm.
as a way to just keep this in perspective.
Hmm.
Yeah. Brad, thank you so much. This has been
Yeah. Thank
wonderful.
you. Thank you.
And what a great way to spend a Friday. I hope everybody has a great Friday. Thanks for coming to Career Lunch Break. We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.